under huge pressure. I think that what we can really say is that this kind of support that has been provided, the bailouts, has been one of the important elements to try and persuade different national governments to have a more international mindset about how to deal with the crisis, to avoid issues such as protectionism, which is a serious issue to look at.
Protectionism clearly was one of the most harmful elements of the response in the 1930s. Do you think that we've managed to get beyond that point in this particular crisis?
I hope so very much. I think that many of the necessary steps have been taken, but times are very difficult. We have to recognize that even though we have provided the bailout to our financial institutions to stabilize them, we still now have the consequences of the economic international recession. We have falling exports. We have countries desperately trying to protect their own trade positions. So we will need to, with our international organizations such as the World Trade Organization and our world international economic institutions, the IMF and the World Bank, we will need to continue to try and ensure that countries do not follow a beggar thy neighbor, an individual strategy to avoid the calamities that we saw in the 1930s.
What will be the major effects for military spending?
The biggest consequence of the international economic crisis is the problem for governments with their budgets. Governments are going to see a fall in their tax revenues, and because of the necessary social expenditures associated with unemployment rising, we'll see rising government expenditures. So governments are faced with two problems. One is the fact they've got to fund a deficit between what they get in the form of revenues, and secondly we've got the problem of rising national debts. So all of this combines to put a big pressure on governments looking at all of their big programs, and defense cannot be left out of this. Politically, for many governments, defense spending comes now under major consideration, major review. So we already begin to see that a number of countries and governments are having to think very seriously about their defense plans and priorities, strategic defense reviews, which will effectively mean that we can expect some reduction taking place in defense expenditures.
So the strategic defence reviews, they're about how much money will be spent, but also how it will be spent. Is that right?
Absolutely. I mean, there is at the present time, there's a kind of a big equation to solve. On the one hand, you have the question of providing money to meet the current operations where forces and equipment are required to meet operational requirements. On the other hand, there is the question about what money and capabilities are needed for future programs, future commitments, and the trade-off between these two is going to be something that will be hotly discussed and debated.
And what's the perception from the other side of the contract, the defence contractors? How are they reacting to this?
Defence industry obviously is concerned that there might be some reduction or lack of commitment to some programs which have been previously anticipated, certain kinds of naval programs or aircraft programs, big questions about manned aircraft programs versus unmanned aircraft programs. So the defence industrial contractors and the supply chains have some concerns about what the future will hold after a decade or more of very productive times for this industry on both sides of the Atlantic. We can therefore expect to see that there may be further pressure for further consolidation, further mergers, possibly job losses in this sector. But I think it's going to be a time of dynamic change, and the key thing really is how to approach this in a positive way to take advantage of the opportunities that are created by the crisis.
And in terms of the overall security panorama, there may be pressures in other areas that are key for security, such as foreign aid.
The international economic crisis means that we are looking at a situation where there's probably going to be less money available for defense and less money available for the wider security agenda. This at a time when the consequences of the economic crisis lead to greater social disorder, problems of rising poverty, tensions that could erupt in certain regions through tribal tensions or tensions to do with further conflict in certain continents. So this will mean that for foreign aid, foreign assistance, it's absolutely crucial that we should be able, as the international community, to sustain our foreign economic assistance. But again, there will be big pressures in this arena to cut back on these programs, and really there's going to need to be very important international coordination and cooperation in this field. NATO can play a very big role in seeking to ensure that greater coordination helps us to deal with the worst potential consequences of this crisis.
And do you think if that doesn't happen, then the greatest consequences of what is largely a developed world financial crisis could be seen in the developing world?
Yes, I think we already begin to see that the instability that is arising. We already know from the World Bank that the number of people that will be impoverished and in a state of real poverty this year will rise by many, many millions, and we will see people dispossessed, people losing not only their livelihoods but maybe their homes. We'll probably see more patterns of internal migration. All of this is going to accelerate the competition for resources. We have to take account of climate change, which is a factor that is not directly caused by the economic crisis, but it is one of these huge issues which accompany the economic downturn, and this will mean that the conjunction of these issues could bring about a perfect storm. So if we don't respond positively and with the right kind of coordinated approach, then I think we could be heading into some very stormy periods ahead.